Good morning and welcome to New Hope Church. My name is Rachael Brooks and I'm glad to be here today, and I'm glad you are too. We're going to talk about something today that many people like to talk about, and that is dreams. Now, for the last 3 months, I've been having really interesting dreams, and the details are so vivid when I wake up that I often write them down or quickly share them with somebody so that I don't forget. And my dreams generally fall into 3 different kinds of categories. There's first, the silly dream that really means nothing, and it just makes my day better when I remember it. I'll give you an example of that, even though it's a little bit embarrassing. But one of my dreams was that I had a neighbor show up and give me 2 adorable little kittens. And inexplicably, I named them the Captain and Tennille. And the little Captain cat had a teeny tiny little hat on his head. And the dream made me so happy that I was actually laughing out loud and woke myself up before the alarm. Now, everybody wants a dream like that, right? All right, no problem. Then the second kind of dream are the dreams where you take events or people or places or things and you kind of combine them in really strange ways. But when you wake up and you review the dream, you can say, oh, I know where each of those components came from. So an example of that is a few weeks ago, I fell down an escalator at the airport. It was kind of embarrassing. So for the next couple of weeks after that, periodically, I would have a dream of falling. And never again was it on an escalator, but it would be, I was climbing a fence in a pasture and I fell. Or I would be walking in the woods and I would slip. And when I would fall, I would wake up with a start. Now, those kind of dreams make sense to us. But then there's the dream that leaves us haunted. It's an eerie dream, a dream where people from our past show up, events from our past, or maybe we see something that's so vivid and real, but it's in the, we feel like it's in our future. It's the kind of dream where when you wake up and you go through it in your mind, you keep going through it in your mind because it's haunting you and you're wondering what on earth that dream could be. I've had some of those as well. So I have to tell you that many Christians will ask me, people in the church, about dreams. And do I think that dreams can mean something? Can they be prophetic? And I say the same thing that I say about ghosts, because people ask me about ghosts. And I will say, ghosts exist in Scripture, so there's no reason that they shouldn't exist now. We are Christians who believe in the supernatural. So as far as dreams go, it's the same answer. There's a long history of dreams and dream interpretation in Scripture, so there's no reason why we couldn't possibly have some sort of prophetic dream now, or a dream that would change the course of our lives and cause us to do something new and wonderful. So last night I sat down and I made a list just off the top of my head of the dreams that I could think of in the Bible. And this is not a comprehensive list at all. But I immediately thought of Joseph and his dreams about his brothers. Pharaoh's dreams that Joseph interpreted. Abimelech's dreams in Genesis. The Midianite soldier in the book of Judges had a dream. Paul's dream about the man from Macedonia. And of course, Peter's dreams about food restrictions. All of those dreams were profound dreams that changed the course of history. There is absolutely no reason that one of our dreams can't direct us to change the course of our life, or perhaps even history. So never ignore a dream. All right, so our story today involves a dream. And I'm going to take you to a slideshow for a moment. So I wish I could do this faster, but I'm just not that fast. So hold on for a minute here, and we will get you there. Right. Last week, we were introduced to Daniel, and we know that Daniel was Jewish, and he came from Judah and was taken into captivity in Babylon. There, he was trained to become a member of the Babylonian court. And Daniel seems to be poised for grand success in the Babylonian court as we leave him at the end of chapter 1. We know that he trusts in God's power. He has not given up on his true and living God. And he maintains his faith, believing that God is in absolute control of all events. And so our story of Daniel continues today. But it begins with Nebuchadnezzar, who is the ruler of the Babylonian Empire during the time of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and the dream is troubling him, and he wants someone to tell him what the dream means. So let's jump in to Daniel chapter 2, verse 1 through 23. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, "I've had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means." So Nebuchadnezzar's having dreams. He's troubled by them. He calls his wise men in and tells them, "I need you to interpret this dream." The astrologers answered the king, "May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it." The king replied to the astrologers, "This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me." Once more they replied, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and then we will interpret it." So what the king is asking for here is not just an interpretation. He's not asking for context. He's asking for content. He's saying to his wise men, "I had a dream. Tell me what the dream was, and then tell me what the dream means." Can you imagine how they must feel about that? The king answered, "I'm certain that you are trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me." So he is not budging on this. He expects these wise men to absolutely tell him what the dream means. And it's a test. And it's really a test of their wisdom and their ability to speak to the Babylonian idols, because it is the idols that they're supposed to be getting this information from. But in reality, they hear the dream and they use divination, manipulation, guesswork, and just human initiative to come up with some interpretation. And so the astrologers answered the king, "There is no one on earth who can do what you are asking. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans." And of course, the wise men are correct. No one can get insight from an idol. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friend to put them to death. So if you remember from last week, I told you that Daniel and his friends were trained in the art of prophecy, and I said, just put that on the top shelf of the closet in your mind. We'll come back to that later. Well, now we're coming back to it. Because even though Daniel isn't present when all of this occurs, he is now considered one of the wise men of Babylon, one of the best. And so when the king says, put all the wise men to death, that includes Daniel and his friends. So the situation is dire. And we read on. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, "Why did the king issue such a harsh decree?" Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Now, this is very important because Daniel's response is very calm. And so we have this feeling that even though the situation is dire and he realizes that his life is on the line and his friends' lives are on the line, he trusts that God is in control. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And during the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. And so what we see here is that Daniel has absolute faith that his God, the living God, will give him the answers that he needs. And so he urges his friends to plead for mercy from God, which means they're praying. They're praying mightily throughout the night that the mystery will be revealed, and indeed we are told that it is. And after the mystery is revealed, Daniel prays this prayer of thanksgiving, and it's a beautiful prayer. Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings, raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You've given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. And that is Daniel's prayer of thanksgiving. He does not forget to thank God when he receives his answer. So what I'd like to do now is look at some of the attributes of the living God that are found in this prayer of Daniel's. And two of those attributes are wisdom and power. Now, wisdom, a rough definition of that would be the quality of having good judgment. We develop good judgment on our own through earthly means, and we acquire that good judgment through experience, through knowledge, through common sense. And it's good to have earthly wisdom. But true wisdom comes from a relationship with God. And that relationship with God is only developed through prayer. We are expected to use both types of wisdom when we make decisions, when we chart out the path for our life. And it's a mistake if we're not relying on God in any matter of our life. Because true wisdom comes from God, not by human work or resources, but rather through a relationship with God. Daniel knows this. So he knows that God is full of wisdom and power, and he prays to God. And God, in turn, gives Daniel the wisdom and the power to succeed. So it's always interesting to me that people will ponder what to do, will ponder as they make decisions, and they talk to everybody in the world, and they go deep internally, and they try to make a decision without consulting God. And usually what happens is they end up making poor decisions, bad decisions, but they don't realize it for quite a while. And so wisdom, the quality of having good judgment, requires both earthly experience and also a relationship with God developed through prayer. Now, the second attribute of God here is power. And power is the controlling of resources, or the ability to change the outcome of events, the ability to see on a grand scale and alter the future. That's power. And throughout history, we see that God intervenes in powerful ways in nature and in biblical history and world history. So I don't think it's a bad idea for any of us to take some time to think about how this applies to our own life. I always tell people periodically in their life to just sit down for an evening and write out a timeline of their life, marking the high points and the low points. And as they do that, they should also pay attention to how God has worked in their life. If they are consulting God in his wisdom as they make decisions, invariably what they will see is that God really delivers them, that God works in their lives in very powerful ways. And so then what we do is we take that timeline and we show ourselves, look, in the past when I have been to a point where I needed deliverance, this is how God worked. And that then in turn builds our faith because we can recall and remember past times when God was with us. And that gives us a very positive position because then we realize that God will indeed work with us in the future. So that's incredibly important. So we see power and wisdom referenced in the first part of the prayer, and I'd like to read that again. Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. All right, now, the second thing that we acknowledge from the prayer of Daniel is that God is a light who reveals truth. God reveals deep and hidden truths. He is a light in our darkness. In this instance, he revealed to Daniel the content of the king's dreams and an interpretation of those dreams. God knows the answers to all things. He knows absolute truths. Now, good Christians can disagree about what a particular truth is because we come to the table with different presuppositions, sometimes different viewpoints, different vantage points. But God knows the absolute truth of every situation. Nothing is ever hidden from God. He knows every thought. He knows every motivation. He knows every action. God shines light on our sin and reveals them to us and calls us to repentance. And every buried problem tied up in convoluted knots is easily unbound by God. He brings his light and his truth to situations, and sometimes it's slow, but the truth and the pathway is revealed. Now, I can tell you that last night I had an interesting evening with the moon. As I went to bed, I looked out the window and I thought, the moon is just absolutely beautiful tonight. And it made me feel very peaceful and calm, and I went to sleep. But then about 3 o'clock in the morning, it was like a spotlight shining in on me. It woke me up. And then I couldn't get back to sleep because the room was so bright. And I thought, it's a great example of that's the way God works in our life sometimes, that, there's this darkness and we see the light of God and he calms us. And there are other times when we see the light of God and it stirs us to wake. It causes us to examine. And sometimes we see the light of God and it guides us. And so the second half of the prayer reminds us of how we are to handle our problems and quandaries. We rely on the light of God because he reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I think that's absolutely beautiful. And so we shouldn't be just depending on our internal resources when we're confronted with a problem or a decision, but we should rely on God and let his light shine through and show us the truth of all things. Now, this is an icon of Daniel. I want to say one final thing about this prayer, and then I think that prayer is an example of faith in action. Daniel is given the content of the dream and an interpretation of the dream, but this story isn't over. The story isn't going to be over until he takes what he knows to Nebuchadnezzar, the king. And Nebuchadnezzar pulls back this order to kill the wise men, including Daniel and his friends. And so I think it just shows how much faith Daniel has that he stops and gives thanks in such a confident way, in such a certain way to God before the story is even resolved. Remember, even though he has the answers, his life is still on the line. And I think it's quite remarkable if you think about that. Sorry about that. Okay, so now I want to leave you with one final thought, and that final thought is this. When we look at the Old Testament, we need to remember that the Old Testament is always pointing to the New Testament. The Old Testament is full of promises that are then fulfilled in the New Testament. And so when we speak of the power and the wisdom of God in the Old Testament, it's important for us to remember what Paul taught us, which is that the manifestation of power and wisdom is Christ himself. Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God, and that's important for us to know. And I'm back. So that's our story for today. A story about a dream. We'll finish that story next week because we finished chapter 2. But what I'd like to do is to encourage you this week to be very intentional as you seek answers to questions that you have or are making decisions. Seek the power and the wisdom of God through prayer. Don't just rely on your own instinct, because the problem with our own instinct is that we're often swayed by evil. It's just part of human nature. And so often a door or a pathway is opened for us, and it's really not the best way. So we have to be constantly in communication with God, because we need to remember that those who seek him, they will see light, and they will see truth, and they will have the ability to navigate in the darkness. And we all live in darkness at some point in our life, but we need to be living in the light. And so on this day, I hope that Christ is with you. Thank you for being here.